He spent 12 years alone on that farm, speaking to no one. Then 2 orcs knocked on his door in the middle of a blizzard, and everything he believed about his own life was proven completely wrong. The blizzard hit without warning. Samuel Thornton had seen bad winters before, 12 of them to be exact. 12 years of watching snow bury the fences, freeze the creek, silence everything within a mile of his farm. He had learned to read the sky the way other men read books, and when the clouds rolled in that afternoon, dark and low and heavy as stone, he already knew. This one would be the worst. He finished checking the last fence post before the light failed completely. His hands were numb inside the gloves, his beard crusted with ice. Wind hit the mountain face and came back meaner, cutting through his coat like it was paper. He walked back to the cabin with his head down, each step deliberate, each breath a small battle. The cabin was small, 1 room, 1 hearth, 1 window facing east. He had built most of it himself, back when his arms were younger and his reasons were different, back when he still believed that building something meant you were building it for someone. That belief had died quietly. Like most things that die quietly, it left no grave to visit. He fed the fire until the room warmed. He heated water. He sat in the chair nearest the door, the one with the cracked arm he had never bothered to fix, and listened to the storm press itself against the walls. The silence inside was complete. 12 years of silence. He had grown so used to it that the absence of voices no longer felt like absence. It felt like weather, something that simply was. He thought of his father, dead 17 years. His mother, gone 2 years before that. His younger brother, taken by fever when Samuel was still a boy. One by one, the people who had populated his life had left it, some by choice and some by force, and eventually he had stopped waiting for replacements. The farm asked nothing of him but work. He gave it everything. He was reaching for his coffee when the sound came. At first he thought it was the wind finding a new angle against the door, but the wind was constant, and this sound was not. It came in 2 distinct strikes, a knock, faint enough that the storm almost swallowed it, strong enough that it could not be anything else. His hand moved to the rifle before his mind had finished processing what he heard. He crossed the room slowly. The fire crackled behind him. Outside, the storm screamed. Then a voice. Female, thin as thread, almost gone. Please, just that word. One word pushed through all that darkness and wind and cold. He heard a second voice join the first. Different pitch, older, ragged at the edges. We will not survive the night. Samuel Thornton had not let anyone through that door in a long time. He had no reason to. He had built his life specifically around the absence of that kind of obligation, that kind of risk. He was 52 days from his 45th birthday. He had made his peace with the shape of his existence. He opened the door. 2 figures stood in the white dark. Snow had buried them to the knees. The younger one had her arm around the older, holding her upright. They were both shaking so hard, it looked like trembling was all they had left. He saw their features immediately. Green skin, pointed ears. The younger one, eyes amber even in that terrible light, met his gaze and did not look away. Orcs, he stepped back from the door. Get inside, he said. They came in slowly like they expected him to change his mind. The older one nearly fell, crossing the threshold. The younger caught her, held her, guided her toward the fire with a steadiness that told Samuel she had been doing it for a long time, not just tonight. For much longer than tonight. He closed the door against the storm and stood with his back to it, watching them. The older woman's white hair had come loose from its pin. Her coat was soaked through. Green skin that should have been warm and deep had gone pale around the cheeks. But even now, shaking beside his fire, she held her spine straight. There was something in her posture that refused to collapse. The younger one was different in the way that made you look twice. Her skin was a softer green, almost emerald in the firelight. Her hair was black and long, partly braided, mostly loose from the journey. She had the bone structure of someone the world might call beautiful if the world were paying a different kind of attention. Her ears came to slight points. Her jaw had a sharpness that sat between both races she carried, half human, half orc. He had seen that before, though not often. The borderlands produced mixed children sometimes. Life did not always ask permission before happening. He did not comment on it. He went to the storage shelf and pulled down 2 blankets, then the pot of soup he had made that morning and barely touched. "Sit," he said. They sat on the floor near the hearth. He handed the blankets across. He set the soup on the iron hook above the fire to warm and pulled 2 cups from the shelf. "Names," he said. Not rude, just direct. The younger one answered first. "Ilara Montgomery." Her voice had steadied some, still quiet, but no longer fraying. "Martha Caldwell," said the older woman. She looked at him with dark green eyes that held more than exhaustion. "We are grateful, Mr. Thornton," he said. "Samuel." Martha nodded once, with a formality that seemed entirely natural to her. "Mr. Thornton." He poured water into the cups and handed them over. He pulled his chair away from the door and set it a short distance from them. Then he sat, because standing over them seemed wrong. The storm threw itself against the roof. The fire answered steadily. He watched them drink. He watched the shaking in their hands, slow, little by little, as the heat reached them. It took a while. They had been out there longer than was reasonable. "Where were you headed?" he asked. "North," Ilara said. "There's a settlement near the Briar Pass. We were told the road was still clear." "It hasn't been clear since yesterday morning," Samuel said. She closed her eyes briefly, like that news confirmed something she had already feared. "We did not know." "You came from Redstone Valley?" Both women looked at him. A small surprise passed between them. "You know it?" Martha asked. "Traded there once. Long time ago." He leaned back. "Long road in weather like this." Ilara glanced at the older woman beside her. Something passed between them, the kind of communication that had been practiced over years of shared difficulty. "We left in a hurry," Ilara said. He did not ask why, not yet. People who left in a hurry had reasons that required trust before they could be spoken. Trust required time. He had learned that much, even living alone. The soup warmed. He served it. They ate. Outside, the blizzard announced that it intended to stay. Samuel looked at the narrow bed in the corner of the room. He looked at the chair he was sitting in. He made a decision without ceremony. "Storm won't break tonight," he said. "Maybe not tomorrow. You'll take the bed." Martha began to object. "I'll be near the door," he said, "in case something comes." Neither of them argued further. He moved his chair close to the entrance, lay his rifle across his knees, and listened to the fire and the wind negotiate through the long hours of the night. He had spent many nights in that chair, always alone. Tonight felt different, and he could not entirely explain why. He was up before dawn. That was not unusual. Samuel Thornton had never needed much convincing to rise. The farm had its own schedule, and it did not wait for a man to feel ready. Animals needed feeding, fences needed checking after a storm, ice needed breaking at the water trough before it became too thick to manage. He dressed quietly. The 2 women still slept, the older one on her back, the younger curled on her side facing the wall. He watched them for a moment from across the room, not with any particular feeling, just to make sure, and then went outside. The cold took his breath on contact. The storm had thinned overnight but not finished. Snow fell steadily, the fat, slow kind that accumulated in silence. He could see a few yards in front of him if he squinted. The mountains had disappeared completely. The tree line was a grey suggestion at the edge of vision. He moved through the morning routine by memory, hay for the horses, water trough broken open with the long-handled hammer. A slow walk around the outer fence, checking posts, checking wire. He found two sections where the drifts had pressed hard against the lower rail. He cleared them with a shovel, working steadily, not rushing. Physical work had been his anchor for a long time. When thoughts pressed too close, he worked. When memories arrived without permission, he worked harder. The body had a way of quieting the mind when the mind became inconvenient. He thought about the two women inside, not in any complicated way at first. He thought about their practical situation, how long the storm might hold, what supplies he had, whether the spare blankets were enough. These were solvable questions. He was good at solvable questions. But underneath that, something else moved. The younger one, Ilara, had looked at him when he opened the door with an expression that he recognized. Not fear, something more complicated than fear. It was the look of someone who has prepared themselves to be turned away and is still, despite everything, hoping they won't be. He had not been turned away, but he understood the look. He had worn it himself once. A long time ago and never again afterward. Vivian Brooks. The name arrived before he could stop it, the way it always did when his guard dropped below a certain level. He had not said it out loud in years. He rarely let himself think it, but 12 years of solitude had not made the memory smaller. If anything, the silence had preserved it, kept it clear and sharp and exactly the size it had been on the day she left. He had been 31. She had been 26. They had known each other since childhood, and he had believed, with the kind of certainty that only the young can sustain, that some things were simply meant to unfold in a particular direction. She had chosen differently. The man she chose was a merchant from the eastern settlements. He had money and smoothness and a future that looked more certain than a farmer's land in uncertain times. Samuel had never blamed her. He had told himself that many times over many years, and by now he almost believed it completely. What he could not forgive, and this was something he had never admitted aloud, was not her choice. It was how completely he had stopped trying afterward, as if she had taken with her not just herself, but his capacity for that particular kind of wanting. He drove the shovel into a snowdrift and stood still for a moment. From inside the cabin, a faint smell of smoke and something warm. Coffee, maybe. He pulled the shovel free and kept moving. When he came back through the door, stamping snow from his boots, he found Ilara at the small iron stove. She had found the coffee tin and the pot, and had made it work without being shown. The cabin smelled different, less like a single-man, single room, more like somewhere people lived. She turned when she heard him. "I hope that is acceptable," she said carefully. He set the shovel against the wall. "It's fine." Martha sat at the table, her white hair repinned and precise, her posture composed as if she were in a far more dignified location. She watched him hang his coat with the expression of someone gathering information. "You were up early," she said. "Always am. The storm is still heavy." "Yes." A silence settled. Not uncomfortable, just the ordinary quiet of morning when people have not yet decided what to say to each other. Ilara poured the coffee. She placed a cup in front of Martha first, then turned to Samuel with the second. Their eyes met briefly across the small space. "Thank you," he said. She returned to the stove, and Samuel Thornton sat down at his own table with two strangers in the middle of a blizzard and drank his coffee while the world outside stayed white and still. They found their rhythm without planning it. By the second day, it had simply happened. Samuel outside before light, the animals, the fences, the slow assessment of snow and wind. Ilara awake when he returned, the stove lit, something heating. Martha at the table, organizing, mending, occupying herself with the small tasks that kept her from feeling like a burden. No one had assigned any of it. It had just arranged itself. He noticed the cabin on the third morning when he walked back in from the cold. The floor had been swept. His extra coat, which had lived over the back of the spare chair for months, had been folded and placed on the shelf. The cups were in a different order, grouped together where before they had been scattered. Small things, barely things at all, but they altered the shape of the room. That afternoon, Ilara made a meal from what she found in the pantry. Dried beans, cured meat, a jar of something he had put up in autumn without much thought. She combined them into something that actually tasted like food rather than fuel. Martha contributed a flat bread cooked directly on the iron surface of the stove, pressing it down with a cloth until it browned evenly. He ate all of it. "You cook well," he said, because it was true, and he had been raised to say true things. Ilara looked briefly uncertain, as if the compliment might be followed by something else. When it was not, she allowed a small nod. "My mother taught me. She believed that preparing food properly was a form of respect for the person eating, for the ingredients themselves." "Your mother was Orc?" he asked. "Yes, she came south from the mountain settlements when she was young, met my father in Redstone Valley." She paused. "He was human, a tanner." Samuel nodded. He did not add anything. He had learned over years of quiet that sometimes the best response to a partial story was to leave room for the rest to arrive on its own terms. Martha spoke from her place at the end of the table. "He was a good man, quiet and careful. He treated her with complete respect, which was not so common then." She looked at her cup. Ilara was 8 when he passed. Fever. "I'm sorry," Samuel said. Ilara looked at her hands. He used to say that kindness was a skill that had to be practiced, that it did not come naturally to anyone, that people who believed they were naturally kind were simply people who had never been tested. The fire shifted in the hearth. Outside the window, snow moved in slow diagonal lines. "He sounds like someone worth listening to," Samuel said. She looked up. The amber eyes held something complicated, grief and warmth simultaneously, the way those two things live in the same space when you have loved someone long enough. "He was," she said quietly. That evening something moved near the fence line. Samuel saw it first, shapes at the edge of the tree line, low and deliberate. He had the rifle up before he was fully standing. Ilara crossed to the window and looked out beside him. 3 wolves, maybe 4, hard to count in the fading light. "They won't come to the cabin," he said, though he kept the rifle in hand. "How do you know?" she asked. Not challenging, genuinely wanting to understand. "They're testing the ground, looking for easy food." He watched the shapes move. "The horses are locked in. There's nothing easy here for them." "Should we do something?" "Wait," he said. They waited. Martha had risen from her chair without sound and stood on the other side of the window, watching with calm, dark eyes that suggested she was not unfamiliar with wolves, or worse. Samuel noticed then the way she shifted her weight slightly to favor her left side, a small adjustment she made without thinking. He filed it away and said nothing. It was not his place to mention what she had not offered. After a time, the shapes at the tree line turned and moved back into the dark. Samuel lowered the rifle. Ilara let out a breath she had clearly been holding. She turned from the window and found him looking at her. The fire was behind him, and the light caught the side of her face. For a single unguarded moment, neither of them moved. Then Martha made the quiet sound of someone settling back into her chair, and the moment broke cleanly, and they both looked away at the same time. Samuel put the rifle back against the wall. "I'll keep watch for an hour," he said. "Get some rest." He sat by the door in the dark with the rifle across his knees, listening to the breathing of the fire and the breathing of the 2 women behind him, and did not let himself think too carefully about why keeping watch tonight felt different from every other night he had done it alone. The question came over breakfast, without warning. Martha asked it the way she seemed to do most things, directly, without cruelty, and with no apparent awareness that it might be unwelcome. "Did you never think of building a family, Mr. Thornton?" The room went quiet in a particular way, not the usual quiet of the cabin, which had its own texture by now. A different kind, the kind that forms around a question that has found its mark. Ilara looked up from her cup. Samuel set down his spoon. He thought about deflecting. He was skilled at that. 12 years of solitude produced a certain fluency with the redirected sentence, the half-answer that left nothing open. He had used it many times when the occasional traveller or tradesman asked questions that reached too far. But Martha's dark green eyes held something that made the deflection feel dishonest. She was not asking to pry. She was asking because she had lived enough life to know when a man's silence was load-bearing. "No," he said. And then, because it was true and truer than the short answer, "I've never had a wife." The words sat there. Ilara did not look away. Martha did not fill the silence with immediate response. Both of them simply held space for what he had said, which was more than he had expected. He turned his spoon over in his hand. "There was someone," he said before he had decided to say it. "When I was younger, I thought it seemed clear to me that things were moving in a direction." He stopped. "They weren't." "What happened?" Ilara asked, gently, like someone who understood the weight of the question. "She chose differently." He set the spoon down. "I didn't take it well, not outwardly. I never made a scene or caused any trouble, but inwardly." He paused. "I closed something, and I never found good reason to open it again." Martha said nothing for a moment. Then, "What was her name?" "Vivian Brooks." It felt strange to say it in company. He had said it to no one in years. "She married a merchant, moved east. I don't know anything more than that." "Do you still think of her?" Ilara asked. "Less than I used to," he said, which was honest. "But she's not what I think about when I think about that time. What I think about is the choice I made afterward, the closing." He looked toward the window. The snow outside had softened overnight. "I don't know if it was cowardice or good sense. I've never settled that question." Martha made a low sound in her throat. Not dismissive. More like the sound of someone recognizing something they have encountered before. "My husband used to say," she said slowly, "that the hardest thing a person can do is remain open to life after life has proved itself untrustworthy." She smoothed the edge of the tablecloth with one careful finger. "He managed it. I am still working on it." Ilara looked at her hands. "My husband never judged me," she said, quietly enough that it was almost private, "for what I am. The mixed blood, the way I look. The way people in town sometimes reacted to me in his presence. He simply acted as though none of it was relevant, because to him it wasn't." "He sounds like a rare man," Samuel said. "He was." Her voice had gone soft and unguarded. "He died 3 years ago. A horse kicked him during a shoeing. It was fast. He did not suffer long." She pressed her lips together briefly. "I'm grateful for that, at least. But the fast ones are sometimes harder to understand. There is no time to say anything." Samuel thought of his brother, gone at 11 from fever, gone in a week, and then gone forever. "No," he agreed. "There isn't." The fire had died down some. He got up to feed it, more to have something to do with his hands than because it needed immediate attention. He placed 2 pieces of wood and stood watching them catch. Behind him, he heard Martha begin clearing the table. He heard Ilara rise and help her, the small sounds of mourning continuing. He had talked about Vivian Brooks. He had said the words, "I've never had a wife," to 2 women he had known for fewer than 5 days, and the sky had not fallen. He was not sure what to do with that. He turned from the fire and went outside to start the day's work. But for the first time in a long time, the silence he walked into did not feel entirely empty. On the fifth night, Ilara played the flute. She took it from her pack carefully, the way you handle something that has survived more than it should have. Small, wooden, dark with age and use. She turned it in her hands for a moment before she spoke. "This was my mother's," she said. "She brought it from the mountain settlements." She looked at the instrument. "It's one of very few things I still have from her." Martha smiled from her chair, not the polite smile she used with strangers, but the real one, the one that reached the lines around her eyes. Ilara looked at Samuel. "Would it bother you?" she asked. "No," he said. She raised the flute and played. The first note was tentative. By the second, it had found its place. What followed was something Samuel could not have named. A melody that moved in and out of something like sadness without ever quite landing there. It had too much air in it for pure grief, too much stillness for joy. It lived in the territory between, which is where the truest music usually lives. Martha closed her eyes. Samuel sat with his hands folded in his lap and did not move. The cabin held the music differently than it held silence. Silence in that room had a particular quality. Complete, self-contained, aware of itself, but sound changed the dimensions. The walls seemed both closer and farther. The fire's movement became part of the music's rhythm without anyone deciding it should be. He was not, in general, a man who responded visibly to things. He had watched enough of his own reactions over the years to know how to keep them interior. But something in this melody did not ask permission. It moved past whatever gate he usually kept. He thought of his mother, specifically the way she used to hum while she worked. He had not thought of that in years. She had not been a musical person particularly, but she hummed the way some people breathe, without awareness, as a natural function. He had grown up with that sound, and then spent most of his adult life without it, and only now, hearing the flute fill the room, did he understand how much the absence had cost him. He did not let any of this show. The melody ended. Silence came back, but it was a different silence now. Warmer, shaped by what had just filled it. No one spoke for a moment. Then Samuel said, "Play another." Ilara blinked, surprised, not by the request, but by the directness of it. Something shifted in her expression. She looked at him in a way that was different from the looks they had exchanged before, more careful, more interested. She played again. This one was faster. It moved the way water does over familiar stones, quick in some places, deliberate in others, always finding its own path. Martha began to hum along to parts of it, her low voice threading under the flute's brightness. Samuel found himself watching Ilara play rather than looking away. The way she held the instrument, the way her fingers moved across it with the ease of long practice, the slight tilt of her head when she navigated a difficult passage. She was somewhere else while she played, not absent but present in a different way than she was during conversation or work, more essential, more herself. Afterward, when the second melody had dissolved into the warm air, Martha announced she was tired and moved toward the bed with the careful dignity she brought to all her movements, which left the two of them. The fire had settled to a steady, even burn. The storm outside had reduced itself to wind. The snow had stopped at some point during the music without anyone noticing. "She was very beautiful," Ilara said suddenly. He looked at her. "You're Vivian Brooks," she added. "She must have been, for you to close so completely." He considered the question seriously. "I think at the time I believed she was the only possible version of something, that if she was gone, the thing itself was gone. And now?" He looked at the fire. "I'm less certain of that now than I was yesterday." She did not respond immediately. He heard her breathe. "My mother played this every evening. she said quietly. After my father died. She played it every evening until she herself died. I used to think she was playing it for him. Later I understood she was playing it for herself, to prove she was still there. Samuel looked at her. I think that's what music is sometimes, he said. She met his eyes across the fire, and for a moment the room was very quiet in a way that had nothing to do with absence. Good night, Mr. Thornton, she said. Samuel, he said. A pause. And then, softly, good night, Samuel. The ice gave way without warning. He had crossed that section of the creek 100 times, maybe more. He knew every stone, every weak point, the particular creek the surface made in early thaw. He had crossed it that morning already, coming from the eastern fence line. He was halfway back when the ground changed, not collapsed, shifted first. A groan beneath him, low and structural. He had just enough time to recognize the sound before the surface tilted and the water took him. The cold was absolute. It had no temperature, in the way that extreme cold stops being a sensation and becomes a fact. He went under and came up immediately, fighting the current, which was stronger than it should have been from snowmelt. His coat had already doubled in weight. His hands hit stone and found nothing to hold. He heard his name. Then rope landed across his chest. He grabbed it without thinking, both hands, everything he had. He felt the pull begin, slow at first, then gaining, dragging him sideways out of the current toward the bank. He found footing on the creek bed and pushed, came out of the water on his hands and knees, shaking too hard to stand immediately. Elara stood on the bank, with the end of the rope wrapped twice around her wrists. Her feet were braced wide in the snow. Her face was white beneath the green, which he had not known was possible until this moment. She dropped to her knees beside him. "Are you hurt?" He could not speak immediately. His jaw was locked against the cold. He shook his head. "Can you stand?" He nodded. She put her arm under his and helped him up. She was stronger than her frame suggested, the kind of strength that comes from years of physical work and necessity rather than size. She bore most of his weight without comment and started moving them toward the cabin. He became aware, slowly, of other details, that she was not wearing her coat. She had dropped it when she ran for the rope, he guessed, that her breath was coming fast and visible in the air, that her hands, still gripping his arm, were trembling. Not from cold, from what had almost happened. Martha had the door open before they reached it. She moved with a speed that her usual composure did not suggest she possessed. She had blankets ready, the fire already stoked, water onto heat. He sat in the chair by the hearth and let them work around him. His mind was still partly in the creek, still hearing the ice groan, still feeling the cold rearrange everything in the order of what mattered. After a time, he stopped shaking. Elara sat on the floor near the fire, her back against the hearthstones, her knees drawn up. She was staring at the floor. Her hands, resting on her knees, were still not entirely steady. Martha brought 2 cups and handed one to each of them, then withdrew to the far side of the room with the quiet of someone who understood that her presence was needed less than her absence. He looked at Elara. She looked back. "You ran," he said. "I heard the ice," she said. "You could have gone in with me. If the rope had pulled you." It did not. He held the cup. The warmth moved up through his hands. "Thank you," he said. She shook her head slightly as if the words were beside the point. He thought about how to say what he was thinking. He had never been good at this, at the direct naming of interior things. The words he had were usually too large or too small for what they were meant to carry. "Elara," he said. She looked at him. "I don't know what is happening here," he said, "between us. I don't have good language for it. I don't have practice." He stopped, started again. "But I want you to know that whatever it is not nothing. It has not been nothing for several days now, and I believe you already know that." She was very still. "I know," she said quietly, evenly, like a person being careful with something fragile. The fire moved in the hearth between them. "I'm afraid," she said after a moment. "Yes," he said. "So am I." Neither of them said anything more, but neither of them looked away. Outside, the storm was almost gone. The sky had thinned to the pale, washed-out blue that comes just before the world decides to become visible again. Samuel sat in his chair with his hands around a warm cup and felt, without quite understanding it, that something in him that had been shut for a very long time was considering the possibility of a different arrangement. Not open yet, but considering. The riders appeared at first light. Samuel saw them from the fence line. 4 horses coming up the eastern approach, moving with the deliberate pace of men who knew exactly where they were going. He watched them come and felt the change in his chest before his mind had named what it was. The particular weight of a threat that has been waiting behind an ordinary morning. He came back to the cabin at a pace that did not alarm the animals, but did not waste time. Ilara was by the window when he opened the door. She had seen them too. Her face had gone careful and controlled in the way that a face goes careful when it is preventing itself from showing fear. Martha stood behind her. Her hands were folded. Her spine was straight. The expression she wore was one Samuel had not seen from her before, not fear exactly, but the deep quiet of someone who has been waiting for a particular arrival and has always known it would come. "Garrett Kane," Ilara said. She did not need to say anything else. He came through the gate at the front of the property on a grey horse, dressed in dark clothing that was too clean for a country road. His hair was grey-silver and precisely arranged. His posture on horseback was effortless. A man who had spent a lifetime making effort looked like ease. Beside him rode a broader man in a deputy's coat with a narrow moustache and eyes that were doing the kind of scanning that men do when they have decided something already and are just looking for the excuse. 2 more men remained at the gate. Samuel stepped out of the cabin. He closed the door behind him. Kane dismounted smoothly. He smiled when he saw Samuel, the smile of a man whose intelligence runs just ahead of his face and is constantly having to slow down. "Good morning," Kane said. His voice was warm, practiced. "I hope we're not disturbing you." "You're on my land," Samuel said. "So we are." Kane looked past him toward the cabin with an interest that was entirely without shame. "I'm looking for 2 women. There have been some accusations of a serious nature. Property crimes, financial fraud, a few other matters." He tilted his head. "I wonder if you've seen anyone come through here in the past week?" "I've not," Samuel said. Kane's smile stayed in place. It did not change even slightly, which was itself a kind of answer. Deputy Rutledge stepped forward. He carried his size like a warning. "Sir, we have reason to believe you're harboring fugitives. That's a serious offense in this territory. If you're protecting criminal elements—" "I don't know what you're talking about," Samuel said. Rutledge looked at him the way men look at other men when they have decided that intimidation is the next step and are measuring the distance. "We'd like to search the property," Kane said, returning his pleasant tone as if it had never left. "If you have nothing to hide, there's no reason." "No," Samuel said. Silence. Kane let it hold for a moment. He was the kind of man who understood that silence had tactical applications. "Mr. Thornton," he said, "I know who you are. I know your reputation in this region. You're a man who keeps to himself, causes no trouble, asks for nothing. I respect that." He paused. "I would hate for a single decision, made perhaps in haste, perhaps out of misplaced sympathy, to damage something you've spent a long time building." "Is that a threat?" Samuel asked. Kane's smile remained. "It's concern, from one neighbor to another." Samuel looked at him for a long moment. He thought about Ilara's hands on the rope, about Martha's white hair and straight spine, about a dead husband who had found something in his papers that he was not supposed to find, and about the accident that followed. He reached back and took the rifle from where it rested against the doorframe. He did not raise it. He simply held it. "Get off my land," he said. Cain looked at the rifle. He looked at Samuel's face. He made a small calculation, visible to anyone watching, and arrived at an answer he did not like. "We'll be back," Rutledge said, pulling his horse around, "and next time we won't ask politely." "Then I'll be here," Samuel said. They left. The two men at the gate followed without speaking. The sound of hooves on snow faded and was replaced by birdsong, the first Samuel had heard all week, announcing that the world was thawing. He stood in the yard for a long moment after they were gone. The warning shot he had considered and held back. Using it would have given Cain something to report, a reason to return with more men, and a legal argument behind them. Silence was harder to answer than noise. He had made the right call, and he knew it, and it did not make the morning feel any less heavy. Then he turned and went back inside, where two women were waiting for him, and told them the truth. The storm was over, the roads were open, and staying had become something that required a plan. Cain would return. He was the kind of man who always did. That night, by firelight, 3 people sat together and made one. The cave was 2 hours into the mountain, at a pace too slow for 2 hours. Martha's hip had been worsening since before the blizzard broke. Samuel had first noticed it the night of the wolves. The way she shifted her weight, returning to her chair, the small, unconscious adjustment she made without thinking. He had said nothing. She had not invited comment, and he respected that. But on the mountain slope, it could not be ignored. He took her pack. Ilara took the rope and the second sack. Martha accepted Samuel's arm without protest, which told him more than any complaint would have. They climbed through spruce and bare rock and the remnants of the storm, snow still deep in the shaded places, the ground uncertain beneath it. He knew this route, had walked it many times alone, in better conditions, with no one to account for but himself. That version of the journey had always been straightforward. This version was different, not worse, different. He was aware of each of them in a way that had no precedent in his experience. The sound of Ilara's breathing behind him, the weight of Martha's hand on his arm. He adjusted his pace constantly, not out of impatience but out of attention. They reached the cave before midday. It was exactly what he had described. Deep enough to cut the wind, dry enough to build a fire, stocked with blankets in oilcloth, preserved food, and a second rifle he had left there after a season of hard hunting. He built the fire near the entrance where the smoke could find its way out, and the 3 of them settled into the close warmth. Martha slept. Ilara sat near the mouth of the cave and looked out at the mountain. Samuel sat beside her, close enough that their shoulders were almost touching. Neither moved away. "Do you think they'll find us?" she asked. "Eventually," he said honestly. "Cain is patient. He won't stop." "Martha has the documents," she said. "Everything her husband found. She's been carrying them since the day we left Redstone Valley." A pause. "She never told me exactly what was in them. She said she didn't want me to be frightened." "They frighten her," Samuel said, "but she carries them anyway." He looked at the old woman asleep on the blankets. Even in sleep, her posture maintained a kind of dignity. He thought about the kind of courage it takes to keep walking when the ground is being removed beneath your feet by someone you cannot prove is doing it. He did not hear the riders until they were close. Sound travels strangely in mountain terrain. The horses were on the upper approach before the echo reached them. He moved to the cave mouth, rifle up, 5 men. Cain at the center, composed as always, Rutledge to his left, scanning. 3 men Samuel did not recognize fanned out on the slope. "Mr. Thornton." Kane's voice was calm. "There's no need for this to go badly. Give us what we came for, and everyone walks away." "They're inside," Samuel said, "and they're staying there." Kane's pleasant expression tightened slightly at the edges. Martha had woken. She came to stand beside Samuel at the cave mouth, a packet of papers held to her chest, her voice clear and carrying. "You should tell him what your name on those documents means, Garrett." Silence on the slope. "I have everything Thomas found," she continued. "Ledgers, letters, the accounts you had him keep, the accounts he was never supposed to share. You made one mistake with my husband. You trusted him with the truth because you needed someone to record it. And he recorded it faithfully. All of it." Kane looked at the documents. The expression that crossed his face was not anger. It was the particular look of a man watching something he spent years building begin to fall. He moved toward her. Samuel moved first. The rifle came up. Kane stopped. Rutledge's hand went toward his hip and froze when he saw where the barrel was pointing. Then, from the lower trail, the sound of more horses. More than 5. More than 10. Elias Turner came up the slope first, a federal examiner known in 3 territories, a man Samuel had heard of years ago from a tradesman passing through, someone spoken of as the kind of authority that moved slowly and arrived with everything it needed. Behind him rode farmers in heavy coats, hunters with rifles across their saddles, 2 men wearing the clean stars of legitimate authority. They had been building a case against Kane for months. Martha's documents were the last piece they needed. Martha walked to Elias Turner and handed him the papers without ceremony. The arrest was quiet. Kane did not shout or struggle. He stood in the snow and watched it happen with the expression of a man who has always known, at some level, that there would be an accounting. Rutledge was less composed, but there were enough hands to manage him. In a short time the slope was clear. The 3 of them stood at the cave mouth and watched the party descend. The valley spread below, the farm a small dark shape in all that white, the road winding east toward the distance. Martha exhaled a long breath. Samuel heard something in it that was not quite a sound, the release of something held for years. The months that followed moved the way recovery moves, not in a single moment, but in deliberate accumulations. The charges were proven in the territorial court over 6 weeks of testimony. The names of Ilara Montgomery and Martha Caldwell were cleared formally in Redstone Valley and posted in 3 neighboring towns. People who had turned their faces away began, cautiously, to turn them back. The farm below the mountain remained the place they returned to each evening, and after a time, it stopped feeling temporary. Spring came slowly that year. It announced itself first in the creek, the same creek where Samuel had gone through the ice, running clear and fast over stones that had been locked silent for months. Then in the fence line, mud. Then in the smell of the air, which lost its edge and became something warmer, something that carried possibility rather than warning. On a late afternoon, when the light came gold across the fields and the last cold had finally let go, neighbors gathered at the farm. It was not a grand occasion, just the people of the surrounding land, drawn by the kind of quiet word that travels without being sent. Elias Turner was there. A few men from Redstone Valley who had found their courage once the truth became impossible to deny. Martha moved among the guests with the unhurried ease of someone who has set down a weight she carried too long. Samuel found himself at the fence line as the afternoon faded, standing beside Ilara while the sounds of conversation drifted from the yard behind them. He had not planned the moment. He was not a man who planned such things. He simply understood, standing there with the mountain behind them and the farm spread out below and the first stars beginning to show above the eastern ridge, that what he wanted to say had been waiting inside him since the night he first told the truth about his own life. He took her hand. She looked at him. "I've never had a wife," he said. The words came out the same as they had at the breakfast table all those months ago, but they carried a different weight now. Not the weight of a closed door, the weight of one being opened, I spent a long time believing that was simply the shape my life had taken. I don't believe that anymore." He paused. "I'd like to ask you something, if you're willing to hear it." She was very still. The amber eyes caught the last of the day's light. "Ilara Montgomery," he said, "will you stay?" She did not answer immediately. She looked at him the way she had looked at him the night of the ice rescue, completely, without reservation, the way a person looks when they have decided to stop being afraid of the answer. "Yes," she said. Martha, standing a short distance away with a cup in her hand and her white hair bright in the fading light, made no effort to hide her smile. The sun finished its descent behind the western peaks. The farm caught the last warmth of the day, the cabin, the yard, the fence line, the mountain rising dark beyond all of it. Somewhere behind them, a child laughed. The smell of wood smoke drifted from the open door. Ilara rested her head lightly against Samuel's shoulder, and he did not move, and the evening settled around them the way evenings do when they belong to the people standing inside them. Martha walked slowly toward the cabin, favoring her left side as she always did, her posture straight in the way it had always been, not rigid, just certain. She paused once at the door and looked back at the two of them at the fence line, and whatever she saw there satisfied something she had been waiting a long time to see. Then she went inside, and the door closed softly behind her. The first stars multiplied above the mountain. The farm held its quiet, the way it had always held quiet, but this quiet was different from the quiet of 12 years of solitude. It was the quiet of people who have found each other and have nothing left to prove. Samuel and Ilara stood at the fence line as the sky deepened around them, and the farm that had been silent for 12 years held for the first time the particular warmth of a place where people intended to remain. Did you enjoy the story? Subscribe to the channel to watch more stories like this one. Leave a like, it helps the channel a lot, and drop a comment down below. I always read them and use your feedback to make our content better. Thanks so much. Orcbound Legacy.